The press conference room was brighter than usual. Cameras blinked like nervous eyes, their tiny red lights watching, waiting. A single long table stood at the front, draped in dark cloth. Flags of France and Burkina Faso framed the backdrop, too still. People whispered. Not loud, not careless. The kind of whispering that told you something was about to go wrong. A translator sat off to the side, fiddling with her earpiece. She looked young. Too young to be the one standing between two nations. But today everyone was standing in places they didn't expect to be. Captain Ibrahim Traoré hadn't arrived yet. Neither had the French diplomat whose name the media refused to say aloud. A hush fell over the room. A silence heavy enough to crush a headline. A small creak. Then the door opened. The French official walked in first. Not a handshake, not a nod. Just a folder tucked under his arm and that strange, hollow kind of confidence men wear when they know they're going to say something wrong. In the second row, someone held their breath. And kept holding. He cleared his throat, but didn't sit. The microphones picked up the scratch of paper as he unfolded his notes. Behind him, the translator stiffened. Her eyes darted toward the entrance. Still, no sign of Traoré. France respects all regional leaders, he began. A pause. That careful, political pause. But we cannot ignore rising concerns. Intelligence sources have raised consistent flags. This security risk must be addressed before cooperation continues. Murmurs broke like waves across the room. He had said it. Security risk. And not just in general terms. The implication was sharp, personal. The translator froze. Her hands trembled above the microphone. She looked toward the door again. One journalist lowered his camera, another turned it on. The diplomat continued, unaware or uncaring of the storm brewing behind the glassy stairs in front of him. No questions were asked, not yet. But the silence now, it wasn't shock. It was a breath taken before a thunderclap. It was almost too perfect, the timing. Almost too cinematic. The door clicked open just as the French official closed his folder. Every head turned. There was no introduction, no guard, no ceremony. Just boots on the floor and a steady walk toward the stage. Captain Ibrahim Traoré entered with the kind of calm that doesn't belong in moments like this. His eyes scanned the room like someone expecting fire but not afraid of it. He didn't look at the French diplomat. He looked at the audience, the people, the journalists, the quiet ones holding cameras and breath. The tension was so thick it almost hurt to blink. Traoré didn't sit either. He stood beside the man who had just labeled him a threat and said nothing. Just silence. And in that silence, something shifted. Not in politics, in dignity. He placed no papers on the table, no speech in hand, just the truth on his face, waiting. The camera zoomed in. The world leaned closer. And somewhere behind that quiet stare was the spark of what no one could yet see coming. The cameras kept rolling. The lights were too hot now. A few journalists wiped their brows, though no one dared look away. Captain Traoré still hadn't spoken. The French official shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat again. He moved his notes slightly, trying to appear in control. But control had already changed hands, and he knew it. The translator looked up, caught between two languages, two powers, and one rising storm. She reached for the mic, then stopped. Still, no words. And yet, everyone heard something. A message in the silence, a refusal to engage on their terms, a man not defending himself, because he didn't need to. The journalists waited for an outburst, a rebuttal, a statement. But what they got instead was something far more unsettling. Captain Traoré simply sat, calmly, and turned his gaze to the audience again, like they were the only ones he came to speak to. In the second row, the reporter who had held his breath earlier finally exhaled. But it wasn't relief. It was awe. One journalist at the back, an older Frenchman with silver hair, leaned forward. He whispered to the woman beside him. He's not denying it. But the woman didn't answer. She was watching Traoré's hands. They weren't clenched. They weren't restless. Just resting quietly on the table. At peace. That was the problem. People don't expect peace in the middle of accusation. They expect panic, anger, retaliation. But Traoré's stillness said something no headline could capture. I am not the one on trial. The diplomat, now visibly flushed, cleared his throat again. This time it cracked. Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding of intent. That's when a chair scraped loudly. Everyone turned again. It wasn't Traoré. It was the translator. She stood up slowly, both hands gripping the mic, and in a voice that wavered, but did not break, she said, "The captain requests that the cameras keep rolling." That was all, but it was enough to tell them he was about to speak, and this was going to be bigger than a press statement. Traoré leaned slightly forward. Not rushed, not rehearsed. His voice was low, but it rang across the room like a bell in a quiet church. You invited me to this table, not to ask questions, but to offer judgment. The diplomat stiffened. But I did not come here to defend my name. Burkina Faso does not bow to insult. No raised voice, no theatrics, just the weight of something real, something earned. You call me a security risk, he continued. Yet your weapons have never left our soil. Your eyes watch our children. Your hands tie the food we eat to your approval. The translator's voice trembled, trying to keep up, but she did. And now you ask us to prove we are safe enough for your friendship? He paused, let it land. I do not accept your friendship. Under surveillance. Silence. Again. But this time it wasn't hollow. It was full. A silence made of shock, of shame, of something beginning to shift. Somewhere in the back a young journalist whispered, "This is history," and the camera didn't blink. The diplomat blinked. Once, twice. But he said nothing. He hadn't prepared for this, for quiet resistance, for dignity that made microphones feel small. Captain Traoré didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply turned his eyes again to the crowd. And in that moment something strange happened. A single clap. Soft. Then another. Not loud applause. Not choreographed. Just one journalist. Then another. Choosing to be seen. Choosing to say, "We heard you." The French official looked stunned. More stunned by the journalists than by Traoré himself. And in that modest, broken rhythm of scattered applause, a truth emerged. The man they came to judge had become the one delivering the verdict, not with accusations, but with presence. This wasn't defiance in the usual sense. It wasn't rebellion. It was something quieter, something stronger. It was a kind of courage the cameras couldn't twist. The room was shifting now, not in noise, but in meaning. One young reporter, barely out of university, rose slowly from his chair. His voice was unsure but carried forward. "Captain Traoré, what do you say to those who still see you as dangerous?" A few heads turned sharply. It was a brave question, or a foolish one. But Traoré didn't flinch. He looked at the boy like a father would, a patient calm behind his eyes. "If defending the dignity of my people is dangerous," he said, "then I accept the risk." The translator struggled to hold the emotion in her voice. Her eyes glistened. Traoré continued, "But ask yourself, who defines the danger? The man who protects his soil, or the one who builds fences around another man's future?" No one moved. The diplomat shifted again, but didn't reach for his notes, because this was no longer his stage, not even his press conference. It had become something else entirely. Traoré reached into his uniform. Slowly, carefully, not for a weapon, for a folded letter. He placed it on the table, didn't open it, didn't explain it, just let it sit there, like a secret that didn't need to be read to be understood. The cameras zoomed in, but the words weren't visible. Only the seal, an African emblem. Old, hand-pressed, from someone powerful. The diplomat's eyes narrowed. He recognized it. Traoré finally spoke again. Before coming here, I received this letter. Not from my cabinet, not from my soldiers, but from an elder, a woman. She wrote only one sentence. He paused. Let the weight settle again. Do not explain yourself to those who profit from your silence. The room fell still. The diplomat, now visibly uncomfortable, leaned back in his chair. But it didn't help, because the walls had already closed in, and not from protest, but from truth, the kind that doesn't yell, it just stands. A voice spoke up from the far left of the room. It wasn't loud but clear. He's not just speaking for Burkina Faso anymore. It came from a Nigerian journalist, seasoned, tired, and old enough to remember other leaders who once stood like this. Most of them were gone now, some forgotten, some erased. But Traoré was reminding them, not by shouting, but by standing still. The French diplomat reached for his glass of water, his hand trembling slightly. The silence was no longer on his side. A ripple was forming. In the eyes of every African reporter in that room, something had changed. The man in front of them was no longer just a president in uniform. He was a mirror, showing them their own quiet compromises, their own buried questions, and in that moment, it became clear. Traoré hadn't come to win a debate. He had come to light a fuse. All eyes turned back to the French official. He had two choices now, speak or leave. He adjusted the mic in front of him, cleared his throat once more, and looked directly at Traoré. But the words didn't come, not the way he intended. Instead of an apology, there was hesitation, a pause too long, too late. And in that silence, Traoré stood again. This time he looked not at the diplomat, not even at the audience, but directly into one of the cameras, the one broadcasting live. We are not your threat, he said softly, unless you fear a nation remembering its worth. It was no longer a press conference. It was testimony. A continent's echo carried by one man's steady breath. The French diplomat opened his mouth once more, perhaps to salvage dignity. But the moment had already passed, and history doesn't wait. Of all the people in the room, no one expected the translator to speak again. But she did. Only this time, she wasn't translating. She stepped forward, gently removed her headset and placed it on the table. Her voice shook, her fingers trembled, but her heart, it seemed, had made a decision. I was taught to remain neutral, she said, but today I choose clarity. She looked at Traoré, not as a politician, not even as a client, but as a man. Thank you for not defending yourself. You reminded us, some things don't need defense, just presence. Tears rolled down her cheeks, quiet as falling dust, and though no one applauded, no one interrupted either. Because in that fragile moment between a crumbling accusation and an unexpected witness, it became clear. This press room was no longer about policy. It had become a memory, one that people would talk about long after the lights cooled and the cameras blinked off. A faint ringtone echoed from the corridor outside. No one moved. The intern who had stepped out earlier now returned, holding her phone like it was hot coal. She whispered something to the security officer at the door. He didn't respond, just nodded slowly, then leaned toward the French diplomat. A brief exchange, barely audible, but the diplomat's face changed, not in anger, not even in fear, in realization. Whatever message had come through, it wasn't good news. He removed his glasses, wiped them, though they were already clean. Traoré had still not sat back down. He didn't need to. The air had already chosen him. Outside the building, voices were beginning to gather, not angry, not shouting, chanting, something low, rhythmic, familiar, from Mali, from Ghana, from South Africa. Different tongues, same echo. We see you. Until now, she had remained unnoticed, middle-aged, soft gray scarf, eyes like stone. When Traoré looked her way, she nodded once, barely a motion. But he saw it. The cameras didn't catch her face. Not really. But Traoré did. And when he finally sat back down, he did so only after her nod. It wasn't power. It was permission. The woman rose. The room hushed again, astonished by this new voice. No mic, no podium, just her presence. "My brother died in a French raid," she said simply. "They called it a mistake. I called it history repeating." She looked at the diplomat. "We are tired of being stories. We are ready to be storytellers." Traoré didn't blink, because this wasn't about him anymore. This was about the room, who it belonged to now, and whose voices were finally allowed to rise. The press room, designed for order, now held something wild. Not chaos, not protest. Awakening. No agenda. No schedule. Just eyes meeting truth, and truth refusing to back down. The French diplomat quietly gathered his papers. Not out of shame. Out of understanding. He stood. Walked toward the exit. But before he reached the door, he paused. Turned. And for the first time since the conference began, he bowed his head. Just briefly. Just once. It wasn't an apology. But it wasn't nothing either. And then he left. The doors closed behind him with a soft click, but no one clapped. Because sometimes, the most sacred moments come in silence. Traoré remained seated, but the world now stood. The doors had closed, but the weight of what happened still hung in the air. People didn't rush out. They lingered, quiet, stunned, a few scribbled notes, but most just sat, processing. Traoré didn't speak. He had no need to. The translator returned to her place behind him, silent again, but changed. The woman in the gray scarf had taken a seat too, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Then a young voice spoke from the back. A cameraman. "Sir, may I take your picture? Not for headlines, not for sensation, just to remember." Traoré nodded gently. The flash was soft, almost apologetic, because it wasn't about capturing a moment. It was about witnessing it. A journalist from Senegal, quiet all day, rose from his seat and reached into his bag. He pulled out a small flag. Faded, slightly frayed, a child's handwriting on one edge. "My daughter gave me this morning," he said. "Told me to wave it if I ever saw a hero." A hush spread. He didn't wave it wildly, he just held it in both hands. Still, reverent. And in that gesture something shifted again. The cameras no longer felt like tools of news. They felt like witnesses of something sacred. Not victory, but return. A return to something that had been buried beneath years of diplomacy and silence, pride, dignity, and the quiet revolution of presence. The press room eventually emptied, but not before people whispered to one another, shook hands differently, and left a little slower. Outside, the chants had turned to song. Low, melancholic, beautiful. Traoré remained seated long after the lights dimmed, the letter still on the table, untouched, unopened. The emblem of Africa on the envelope seemed to glow faintly under the remaining studio light. And then, he stood. Not like a leader leaving the stage, but like a man returning to a promise. He didn't wave, didn't smile. He just nodded once, to the silence, to the room, to us. Some stories aren't told for views, they're told to remind us who we are. If this one moved you, if it stirred something deep, don't let it fade. Share it. Speak on it. Let it live beyond this screen. Because every time a voice rises for dignity, it deserves to echo. Subscribe if you believe stories like this still matter. Like if you felt even one moment of truth. Comment with what stayed in your heart. We're not just reporting the news. We're remembering who we were meant to be.